And
Sure.
but there had to come a point in the 1980s, I think, certainly by the 1990s, where Miscavige saw behind the curtain. He saw behind Hubbard's nonsense and was like, this stuff is bullshit. And then, and it's been a gradual progression over these years that Miscavige has been in charge, that he's morphed Scientology into something that's more what he thinks it should be. And he has made it pretty clear in the way that he acts to anybody, any outside observer, not a Scientologist, of course, but to anybody else, that he really is only in it for the money and the power at this point. So
sure. And Dave, if you real quick will put up, I put 3 facts that I wanted to have you kind of touch on about Xenu. And I pieced together what I thought Xenu might look like if he were here today. So the there should be one more on there, Dave. That's missing the third one, but he's the dictator of the Galactic Confederacy. He gathered billions of citizens, froze them in dropped them into a volcano on Earth, and then the third point would be him getting overthrown and then locked into a mountain prison.
Yes.
So you can just kind of you can go ahead and switch back.
He also blew them up with atomic bombs. He dropped them in the volcano, then hydrogen bombs, right?
Yep.
Well, those are atomic bombs.
Yep. Yes, he did. Yeah, all of those things are true.
Okay. There we go. Now take us through the story of Xenu.
Okay. It's a story. Okay. There are 8 OT levels. OT stands for operating Thetan. It's the goal of Scientology to become an operating Thetan. Not just a Thetan. You are already a Thetan, but you're not operating. You're not in control of your life. You're not in control of yourself. You're not even aware that you are a Thetan. I mean, you're stuck in a body. That body is who you think you are, when really the body is more like a splinter in the thumb of the Thetan. I mean, the Thetan doesn't have a physical manifestation. A Thetan is something that exists outside of the physical universe. It doesn't have any weight, mass, wavelength, anything detectable about it, supposedly. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been a Thetan forever. Ever since you first started existing, that's what you have been. Through the millennia of living in the physical universe, which is matter, energy, space, and time that is all around us, you've had a lot of adventures. And some of them very, very traumatizing. Some of them very, very stressful. You've lived and died billions and billions of times. But even some of these experiences are actually worse than just having a body that you have die. Because you, as a spiritual entity, can be tied down with certain forms of electricity, Hubbard says. This is all according to Hubbard. I'm not saying that any of this bullshit's true. But I'm putting it all into a context here of how Scientologists think about this and the backstory of it. So there are certain kinds of electronics that can be used to trap you and implant you. Okay? In other words, force you, hypnotize you, make you think certain things. Hit you with so much force, electronic force, that you are knocked out as a spiritual entity, that you're unconscious even. You're not dead. You'll continue living, but you're just out of it. You're in a daze. You're hypnotized, whatever kind of way you want to think about this, okay? There have been many, many instances over all the millions of years, trillions of years that you've lived. And Hubbard said that the universe is about 4 quadrillion years old. So it's pretty old, according to him, much older than scientists think it is. So you've had many, many, many of these kinds of misadventures where you've been trapped as a Thetan and implanted, told to think things. And you end up not remembering those implants, but you remember what you were supposed to think. And some of the things you were supposed to think are that bodies are really important, that you are a body, not that you have a body, this kind of thing. So it's kind of like, the analogy is kind of like a child plays with dolls, and then one day introverts into the doll and becomes the doll and starts thinking of himself as the doll, not as himself, right? That's kind of the thought process there. And I have to explain that so this whole Xenu thing will make sense. That's why I'm talking about all this. Mm-hmm. So in all of these misadventures that you've had, many of these misadventures are forgotten about. You just have total amnesia on it. And sometimes the implant that you received forced you to forget about it, right? Kind of Manchurian Candidate kind of stuff, okay? Mm-hmm. And this has been done to people over and over and over and over and over again. Well, the one incident that everybody on planet Earth has in common is this Xenu thing. It's what trapped us all here. It's why we're stuck here on planet Earth and not flitting around in the universe. It's the reason that we're stuck in bodies. It's the reason why we have religion. All of this, the modern way that we live our lives, you have a family, you have some kids, you get a dog, you get a white picket fence, the American dream, all this stuff is a result of these implants. They were control mechanisms that were installed in us trillions ago, millions of years ago, to control us so that we would not roam the universe making trouble for people who were trying to control other spirits, other entities. These guys wanted to be in charge. This is how they went about being in charge. So 76 million years ago, in this corner of the universe, meaning our sun, Sol, right, and the 13 other suns, nearest stars around our solar system, constituted what was called the Galactic Confederacy or the Markab Confederation. And this confederacy was ruled by a guy named Xenu. And he was kind of tyrant-like. He was kind of Pol Pot, Stalin-esque, right? And there was a big problem in the universe back then, in this corner of the universe, I should say. And that problem was called overpopulation, because back in the day, our bodies that we used to have, at this point in time, 76 million years ago, civilizations existed on these 13 planets. They had cars and fire trucks and airplanes and and spaceships and shit. And it kind of looked a lot like, Hubbard compared it to 1950s or 1960s America, fedora hats, business suits, fire trucks, all that kind of stuff. Odd that he would do that, considering that he wrote all of this in the 1950s and 60s. He couldn't imagine, a more advanced civilization. But anyway, he said that this was kind of what the civilization looked like, but there were big differences. One of the big differences being that people lived a really long time. Their bodies did not have a 75-year lifespan. They had an extremely much longer lifespan. And so when you had a new body come along, and people were making bodies the way we make bodies now, but they lived for a really long time. They didn't die. So all of these planets had billions of people on them. Millions and millions and billions of them. There were just tons and tons of people. The figures Hubbard cites are ridiculously large. I mean, just millions and millions of people. So overpopulation is a problem. Xenu is trying to figure out how he's going to solve this problem. And the government structure of this confederacy was such that he had a core of people under him, the military, that he could use to exert his will. And so he decided that he was going to solve overpopulation. I don't know how or why. Hubbard never really gets into his motives at all. All of this is very, very summarized. Hubbard doesn't get into a lot of detail about all this. But he said that Xenu decided one fine day that he was going to solve this by rounding everybody up and basically sticking them with a mixture of alcohol and glycol. I don't know why that's the magic formula, but if you inject that into somebody, then for some reason, not only do they go unconscious or die physically, but their thetan goes unconscious.
Makes sense. Makes complete sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense, right? Because a thetan has no mass wavelength energy, but yeah. So you use alcohol and glycol and you knock them out. So by calling everybody in for a tax audit or other similar type of thing, you get a phone call from the IRS one day and, hey, you're to report to, 3rd and J Street because we're auditing your finances and you don't have a choice in the matter. And if any of us received such a phone call, we would report to the IRS office because we're good citizens. Only to be, chloroformed, stuck with the needle, and stuck in some frozen container. And logistics aside, okay, like we're going to put all the timing of this aside because Hubbard's time frames don't make any sense. They're just completely unrealistic. But he said that within about a year or two, they had gathered everybody up. Okay, now again, we're talking about millions and millions of people. So the operation to do this must have been some kind of logistical miracle. But somehow we just, go along with the idea that that they pulled this off and that Xenu and his dark, malevolent army of people who somehow, some way thought this wasn't going to happen to them, even though that's exactly what ended up happening, pack everybody up, stick them on spaceships, and these must have been some huge spaceships. Apparently they looked like DC-8s or DC-10s or something. But these were spaceships, and they packed everybody up on these ships, and they shipped them all to a planet called Tegeac. And that is now called Earth. And Tegeac had its own population, okay? And all of those people on Tegeac did not get this alcohol glycol treatment. They were just on the planet, living their life, and suddenly all these spaceships show up, dump all these bodies there. And now the thing is, back then, people were aware of the fact that they were spiritual entities and that if they died, they would just go pick up another body. Now, if you think about that for a second, you would realize that if that were true, if that were the case, our entire civilization would look remarkably different from 1950s and 60s United States. I mean, if you knew you were an immortal spiritual entity, would you be living the life you're living right now? I wouldn't. I'd be doing all kinds of crazy shit, right?
Yeah.
Because I know I'm going to come back around again. Like what death suddenly becomes meaningless, But in this culture that Hubbard describes, still looks like our modern civilization for some reason. So anyway, like I said, for all of his imagination, Hubbard was a pretty unimaginative person when it came to this whole fantasy of Xenu. But anyway, all these people get dumped here. Xenu then proceeds to order atomic strikes. Like all these people are dumped, but they're not just dumped, they're dumped in volcanoes. And then, or just scattered around. And because there's so many of them, they're not all going to fit in volcanoes anyway. So that might or might not have been a key part of it. But what was a key part of it was that atomic weapons were used to completely obliterate everybody. Everybody.
And weren't they flown over in spaceships that looked just like a Douglas DC-8, which, by the way, was built in the late 50s? Yeah, so in the 1958, late 50s, for many years, actually, the DC-8 was produced. That's not very original because that was concurrent with his time. And he's like, you know what? Yeah, the spaceship, they were like those DC-8s that we got. Okay.
Maybe he was trying to make it believable.
Right. Exactly. So again, this was all written in 1967. So, so everybody gets dumped here. They blow everything up. And this is now, Xenu has now basically engaged in galactic genocide. But he's not done yet. Because here's the problem, right? Is all these spiritual entities that are still alive are now stuck on Tegeac. They're stuck on planet Earth, right? But you'd think, well, they could just flit off and go to some other planet somewhere. What's keeping them here? Well, apparently, Xenu set up traps. He set up these energy fields around the planet that hold Thetans inside of it.
Gravity.
And all of them are stuck here. Now, this is just the beginning of their trouble. Losing their body was just the beginning because then he'd somehow, and we aren't going to ask how, but somehow he set up implant stations all over the planet. Oh, God. And all of these disembodied Thetans, like I described earlier, this has happened to Thetans many, many, many times, not just with Xenu. But what happens now